morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yamaguchi of Graduate School for Information Science, Nara Institute of Science and Technology. It was last summer that Ueno-san came to me and suggested I speak. I was up and running back then, so I didn't think that my health would be so deteriorated, but my health began to somewhat deteriorate since September, so allow me to be kept sad as I speak. OWASP keynote speaker, wow, that's a great honor. So far, I've been in the area of operation and network, and I've done many lectures in those areas, but software development or service development, how security can be improved in those areas is a very important subject matter. And I did have some ideas, and I have been making various efforts in that area. But there's so many things that are still left undone. And in this context, the Japan chapter being created and the practice being extended is something that we ought to welcome. I've been given 40 to 50 minutes, and data-centric service from the security perspective will be my agenda item. Why have I chosen this subject? It's based on the lesson I've learned, but in the past decade, information security or security-related activities had been focused on strengthening operations. And that had been the case, at least in this nation. For example, East End response, or how acceleration for analysis could be done, or management, how depth can be ensured. Those were the focal points. So in the past decade, first, how can we make the operator vividly active against security? The government, companies, as well as academia had been exerting efforts in that area, but Microsoft is calling for design by security, and since 2009 or 2010, that had been the focus. So we're now concerned about the system per se, and we have to think about the security of the system per se, and there has been a shift of focus. And in that context, OWASP is also thinking about open component in open community and how web ought to be used in a secure environment. So as a market-independent organization, OWASP has been endeavoring to come up with components. And again, operation and system, there still is focus on operation aspect, but more recently, the user-created data or system-handled data moves the service. People have become aware of that, and data virus, we need to be more protective against data viral attacks. And therefore, this morning I would like to give you some case studies to give you the message that the developers are truly working hard to meet those aims. When it comes to specific technique or technology, there will be other speakers who are experts of those respective technological areas. So I would like to take a step back and give you more of an overview rather than some specific technological perspective. That is why I will begin with talking about global business. And then data-centric services have become quite ubiquitous, and I will touch upon that. And also, the architecture itself has gone through great change. And security management is also changing. So in this context, I will give you my personal view on what developers ought to be doing. Now, first of all, global business. Of course, Japan is not immune, and we're now in an era where you can do business anywhere on this planet, be it Japanese companies or American companies. All worldwide companies are doing business everywhere. Because of my health problems, I've not been able to travel so much in the past year, but I've been traveling until then to Africa quite frequently. In the past 3-4 years, Afrinic events were some of the events that I had participated in. But it's not just the Western companies, but Asian companies who are flooding into the African continent. And Yamaha, Toyota, Honda, these are quite active in Nairobi with dealership and other places in the African continent. But at least in the business world, we're not just talking about only the Japanese market. Cross-border activities are ongoing everywhere on this planet. And this activity has been enabled by the computer and network. Unless there was the computer and network, this situation would not have been created. And optimization of business operation would rely on computer and network. And because of the worldwide connection provided by these inventions, this has become enabled. Investments, enterprise resource management, or financial asset management, information process, and human resources management is now on the move at a level of extremely high mobility. If we relied only on manual work, this would not have been possible, and that is why we've been relying on the computer and the network. The economists would call this the knowledge-based economy, and it's the initial stage. I don't understand that phrase very well, but more specifically, it's about using the computer and the network to enable people to do business everywhere around the world. And that is where we are in terms of global business. Then, what is a typical case? I'm not sure whether you're exposed to this, but supply chain management would be a symbolic example of the engine that supports global business. Japan uses, in many cases, closed SCM, but other countries mostly rely on open supply chain management. But fundamentally, it's about the economic activity or business activity support. And it's a network system that supports those activities by businesses. This is only a manufacturing sector example, but there could be the supply chain management for the food sector of supply. And also, after the final product is manufactured, how does it reach the final customer? There could be a supply chain, and therefore supply chain creates a huge corporate network. Say you want to conduct an event. I have friends at Dentsu, the advertising agency, the biggest ad agency in Japan, and 12,000 companies would be involved to create a supply chain for just one event. And the personal information will be controlled by participation of as many companies. So supply chain management applies not only to the manufacturing and food processing sector, but supply chain management is indispensable for any major scale corporate activities. Even in the small and medium enterprise world, how can we make this secure? Supply chain management system came to birth in the late 80s to early 90s, and in many ways it's been expanding. It's about stabilization of the system and to what extent can order and delivery be managed well in an optimized manner. That's the gist of SCM, but more recently, it's not just about order and delivery optimization, but it's expanded to management optimization. Just-in-time delivery was created by Toyota, but it's something similar but more sophisticated, from placing the order to the final product. And also financial management is also covered, and further, resource allocation within one company is also subject to SCM. So after the year 2000, these trends have become prevalent. And from around that timing, supply chain system had become quite ubiquitous, and it's replaceable. If it's broken, then you can replace it. Rather, More importantly, it's the manufacturing expertise or the know-how of financial management or the short-term cycling of the accounts receivable and payable, and also the financial accounting within the company that becomes important. And in the end, where is security so important in supply chain management? It's not protecting the system, but rather the protection of the data and the protection of the expertise that lies on top of the data that's become the biggest challenge in terms of supply chain management today. And when you look at people who own gigantic supply chain management, outsourcing has progressed quite significantly, and the supply chain management system itself is outsourced to cloud companies or hosting companies, third parties. In other words, the hardware itself or system protection is left up to third parties and outsourced. That's become the standard practice. But when it comes to data or expertise, it's their proprietary data and they want to keep ownership and control. And that's also created on the internet by using the web. So in the past decade, there has been a great paradigm shift from systems protection to data protection. So what are we truly talking about? Yes, information systems do many things for us, but at this stage, how can we use this as a business enabler? I believe that this is one of the most important roles of the IT system. So you create the information system for the sake of creation of business, or create an information system to simulate whether the business will be successful or not. That's how the way of use has changed. There was a business opportunity, there was the expertise, and then came the information system. That had been the historical sequence, but now you have to have the information system to capture business opportunities. But it's not the information system that gains profits, but it's the data and expertise that becomes the source of profits. Then, most recently, what is the expertise of making money, integration, and interaction? Supply chains are being connected and expertise are becoming integrated. And because of M&A activities and systems interoperability, such practice is expanding. All Nippon Airways booking system, was it around 2004 or 3 that they launched that booking system? So it's probably 10 years ago that ANA Airlines began the booking system on the web. And it only enabled booking management. But say you go to the web service of ANL or Japan Airlines Group, then you can purchase the goods and tickets and make bookings for events. And more recently, they even sell condominiums at ANA website, which is quite appalling. Not really appalling, but wonderful. Anyway, they sell anything on their website. Same applies to Rakuten and Amazon. So interaction is expanding the scope of business opportunities, and having a common platform for data management has become ever more important. How did this shift occur? It occurred over a span of 30 or more than 30 years. At the beginning, in the 1980s, manufacturing became globalized and ICT came to be in use. In 1982, I went into college, and the first system was BAX 11750 that I had the opportunity to touch. That was back in 1983, and the price tag was 300 million yen, 0.3 mega, 80 megabyte disk, and 4.2 BSE. And back then, engineering workstation was the name given to this machinery. In other words, it was for simulation and manufacturing. It used to be 2 billion yen. Now it's only 300 million yen. And CAD on the backs. If you had the money, it would have been operable, although not as comfortable as today. And also, simulation was made possible. But in terms of manufacturing, open and global and network began to come about. And then in 1990s, finance became more globalized. 19, since the 1960s, the Japan Bankers Association system came into use, but in the 1970s, that Bankers Association network, ZengiNet, became operable. And then interbank network came into play for the first time in 80, and then the central bank made SWIFT open for the first time in the 1990s, and then that enabled a remittance to foreign banks by Japanese commercial banks. And also with banking and security brokerage coming in for the first time, the Japan Bankers Association came to join the BOJ net. So finance became globalized in the 1990s, and finance and manufacturing had gone through globalization. And then, at last in the 2000s, a system began to send expertise, and people began to talk about the knowledge-based economy. And therefore, the 30 years of history until then had led to accumulation of expertise and knowledge. And that was delivered on the system since the 2000, and we probably exhausted the knowledge. I'm not saying knowledge is no longer there, but we've exhausted the past knowledge. So in the past 10 or 15 years, it's become data accumulation to discover new knowledge and then to re-input that knowledge into the system as expertise. So that's how change has occurred. Now we are in different times, so it's data that is driving the economies. And that is why people are talking about big data or data analytics and business intelligence all around the world, and data-driven marketing, corporate management. These are some of the jargons that are being used, and big data is such a hot topic in universities. So everything is all about data. So as we live in such times, how can we protect the data per se rather than just the system? That's something we need to begin to think about. So data has its own life cycle since birth to death. First, it's created, and then it's rated, and then it's discarded. And this is the image, the obsolete image that existed 10 years ago, but obsolete but remains unchanged. So how can you use that data and store that data and transfer and make it public and discard the data? Many problems are occurring phase by phase, and there are expertise for each phase. Anonymization, pseudonymization, using a tentative name. And you have to do that in the publish stage. JR East, Suica password leakage problem occurred, and data for the IC card was being transferred to a separate company, which is not illegal, but is the anonymity they were asserting truly ensuring anonymity? Someone began to say that, and then it became an incident. It was supposed to be anonymous, but it made the headlines, so it became a big scandal. So how do you check the anonymity in Europe? From the privacy control perspective, many policies are being recommended, but is sufficient anonymity being ensured? You don't know. There's no answer to that. And for example, be it transfer of data, HTTPS is being used. So is that safe enough? But Verizon of the United States, Flare Pipe service model was suggested, and software encryption is not enough. So bulk lump sum clear type will have to be necessary. So they came up with that model. So data life cycle has remained unchanged, but the handling of the data has changed with the advancement of the times. And in this context, in each phase, appropriate processing has to be done. And in the web computing or web service or data service, are we being able to do that? Once again, we need to reconfirm whether we're doing it right. And let me give you my prophecy or my prospects. I don't think it's being well done. And that's the concern I have. So let me give you one example. This is just one of the several examples. One of the data-centric service examples is a smart home. Who lives in a smart home? Raise your hand if you live in a smart home. Wow. Well, this is the first time ever that someone raised his hand when I asked the question, does your home have HEMS and solar panel, dynamic solar power, PV and solar generation combined? Wow. Two components came into play. One is PV and the other is EV. And PV is power generation, which is quite simple, but EV is charged battery. In the case of plug-in EV, you could use it in the home as well, not just for the vehicle. So if solar power generation can be stored, it could be stored in the EV by making use of the daylight. And depending on the pattern and use and behavior, you can optimize the use of the battery. And therefore, in the end, you would have to minimize or not rely on external supply of power or minimize the use of external power supplied by other companies. And if you have a surplus of power generated through the PV system, you can even sell that. And HEMS and the smart home system, the system itself, of course, has to be managed well. But what's most important is how the lifestyle of the user and how the user is using the data and household data. How can you share the household data for embedding the lives of the people? The issue with regards to power-related data is being discussed by the government in their deliberations of power sector reform. And sorry that this PowerPoint is only in Japanese, but this is a household, this is a home. And this is, by the way, Federation of Electric Power Company of Japan sourced data. And the meter for the HEMS is only one of the several devices that looks at the consumption of power. And for the EPCO, it's a tool to know about how much each household is using. And making adjustments to the supply demand response, DR, is not existent yet. It's something for the future. If DR is enabled, A and B shall be connected, and dynamic adjustment of the amount of power supplied could be done so that households can reduce the volume supplied from external EPCOs and save money. And the third, in a third-party company, even in a third-party company, F-Power or J-Power or ENET, those are not the incumbents but newcomers in the power sector. They can use the large consumers. They can pick up the large consumers as potential customers. So A, B, and C can communicate with each other between systems in the future. It's not being done now. So we're about to come up with something data-centric so that A, B, and C can share the data. So the key is this portion, how we can protect the household data and how should the use pattern of power of a specific household be opened or made public to the third-party provider. And this kind of deliberation will begin next week by the participation of electric power companies. And the key issue is who has the ownership of this data and who has the right to control such data. When it becomes to security, it's about systems protection, but who can protect the data? Is it the household, the EPCO, incumbent EPCO, or the new IPP? Whatever is created by the smart meter, meter, how can we evaluate the ownership of the data created by this meter, smart meter? Currently, smart meter is robust as a system. Currently, robustness of the smart meter is being discussed, but there has so far not been any debate whatsoever on how the data created by the smart meter should be protected, neither by the electric power companies or the IPPs. HTTPS can be used. Isn't that sufficient? We don't know. Really? Is that sufficient to protect the data? We really don't know. And further, the protection of smart meter is being suggested, but what about the in-home data? Because do they want to disclose that data? The air conditioning power consumption or the refrigerator power consumption, how can they be made abstract so that it could be made public? We're using a system called EcoNet, but what about the protection beyond that? How can such data be protected, used, and discarded? There's no harmonized standard. And if the customer offers, then it's made public. And they're persuaded by electric bill savings. So is it really, can security be sacrificed only for the sake of such monetary benefit?
Therefore, we have to do something about this. And this is the major issue with smart homes, and the electric power industries have become aware of this. So how can we protect such data? And discussion has begun, and the data is stored in a wide area electric management, but as to how this will be used, we are thinking about how to protect them. And earlier I showed A and B. The meter and the power supply will have to be connected, but the demand response is something of the future. Therefore, until we arrive at that, we have to make sure that there's security. If we reduce the electricity supply to the homes, then some people might die. So we cannot go to a demand response right away. So this will really have an impact on the person's life. So recently, we have begun to think about this. However, there are two issues. Because there are too many devices that are relevant, in other words, PC-like computing devices not all used, and there are so many standardization, and the ISO is almost finished, but in the vendor forum, IoT and M2M, they are trying to standardize the area that may be marketized. But ITOT and IEC, these are government-related, but it's relatively slow. So as of now, proper standardization has been carried out. So in a good way, we want to be able to have a fast and a useful standardization. And this is going to be very important for smartphone business. And we talk about non-PC devices, but the web server is moving and web server has been provided. So this situation is quite a problem. In the case of TV, Firefox OS is moving, and Linux is also operating, and web server is being used, and there is a management interface available. So be it TV or video, we have hard disks and so forth. So web technology is being used in these places. So when it comes to home network, if you simply think about a smart home, there are a lot of things that we need to do by OWASP, and there are other things you have to think about. You shouldn't say that you're not related to this. Now, the vendor forum is trying very hard with respect to M2M architecture, and there's the same structure. Beyond the gateway, there is a home devices, and there is a database and server at the backbone. And the web service is being utilized quite extensively, and the web application is being driven. And from the client, the application servers, they use a web application, that they use the data. to try to do something good here. For example, building management, etc. So in that sense, the vendor forum is in charge of M2M, but the web technology and application technologies are being used is an enormous amount. So this type of things have taken place over the 20 years, and it has changed dramatically. So which place is the most risky? The backyard server, is it okay? We are very much concerned about this. In the case of application, people would try very hard to create them and using OWASP's component and trying to secure. However, where the data goes, it's the IT business platform. It's a backyard server. The information leakage from a backup server has been happening very frequently. So the backup server has been broken and a lot of data had been stolen. And on the database, there is a data which was not encrypted, and there had been a lot of serious issues. And I believe that you don't do this, but if you look around, these things are happening in very large numbers, and the data that is stolen is in the order of 100,000 or 1 million, and there have been very serious incidences. In other words, in the application and system operation, they're trying very hard. However, when it comes to the backyard server, the business platform, are we really sure that it's secure? So over the past several years, this has become a very big concern. So we have to secure security management everywhere. So in all of the phases, we have to have a proper security management. And if you look at the data cycle, data life cycle, the application structure is such that they are doing labeling well, and then they are injecting appropriate things. And this has become very important, particularly when it comes to personal information or credit card numbers or other valuable information. We have to be aware of this to address this. The other point is system protection. To the data protection, that is not a best fit. For example, in system protection, we often talk about a lot of authentication and create authorization schemes and so forth. However, from the standpoint of data protection, it has a lot of overhead cost, and can we really protect it? In most of the cases, we cannot. Therefore, when it comes to system protection and data protection, it should be of a best fit, and it should be compatible. And in certain cases, a special method for data protection should be properly introduced. What is the biggest issue? The encryption. In other countries, encryption has been used very frequently. However, in the case of Japan, the protection of personal information was established 10 years ago, and even if the data is encrypted, if the leakage occurs, it's not good enough. So if the large companies decided that if the information is going to be leaked, it's not used to use encryption. So in Japan, using the encryption service is very low. This is available through the OECD data. With respect to the product use as well as encryption use, Japan's use is very low compared to other countries. And under such a situation, if we have a system protection, even if the data is not encrypted, people feel that it can be protected, but that is not the case. And then what do we have to do? We should not simply depend on system protection. We have to incorporate a data protection scheme. And of course, including encryption, there are many things that needs to be done. So over the past 10 years, what has happened? The developer has forgotten how to use this scheme for encryption, and this is very serious. To apply encryption and the techniques thereof are no longer there as a know-how in the developers. So in that sense, by using the common component to have data encryption. And you shouldn't be afraid of that, which is very important. And we really want you to think hard about it. And the risk itself has become too diversified. So in reality, there are not only malicious activities. And we tend to focus much on malicious activity, but that's not the case. The operator may take the data away and sell them. They would take the copy of the data and they would sell to the data operators. So there are a lot of internal crimes, and there are also human errors. And sometimes the data may be lost. So in that sense, the risk has diversified, and the security companies, APT, and other type of sales pitch have been told, but they don't talk about human error and non-intentional troubles. So the world is such that we are too much concerned about the malicious activity, but in reality there are many other activities. So we have to evaluate the risk, and to take appropriate measures against it is going to be very important. So without security is unthinkable. So no security, no service situation is continuing. So you are thinking about the development security. So what do we have to do? This is very simple, but there are three things that needs to be done. Number one, you have to protect the data. Encryption would be the main one. So I'm not going to mention about any individual issues. However, when it comes to encryption, the decryption code should be smarter. At the moment of decryption, there is a lot of copy created. So how can you protect the decrypted data, and how can you clean up the buffer, and so forth? So there are a lot of things that you have to think about, and you have to create the decryption code very cleanly, and there are implementations that are necessary, but we have to think about all of these things. And HTTPS is not powerful enough for encryption, so we have to rethink about this. And sometimes client certification and sometimes a server combination will have to be done. So we have to be more creative with respect to the use of HTTPS. We should forget about saying that HTTPS is safe. But the problem is the next one, which is storage protection, which is very cumbersome. I'm sure you can create your files, but when it comes to a huge database and how to protect the file system, which is quite serious. For example, at my university recently, we're using Hadoop, and 1 petabyte experimental data was stored. And we have created a research storage for that. And I myself is the director, and so I would place requests. But we are collecting genetic data, so we want to make this encrypt. It's 1 peta, but it's not possible. So let me think about it, is what I said. So I'm just making this a pending issue, but in reality, a peta is relatively small. Now we are talking about 10 peta as well as 100 petas. So huge, in the case of a huge data service, they are using an enormous amount of data. So we will be eventually going into the X level. But the encryption of a file system is not simple in reality. So we should be able to make them survive and to try to operate on live and to try to operate just the part that is needed. And depending on the risk, it should be closed as necessary. So the true for database. The filing system is a type of a database, so the granularity is small in the case of database, so it's even more cumbersome. But the encryption of the database itself is very difficult, and the API that will be used will be also very difficult as well. So we have to be creative here. And now we are talking about storage and how do we do the storage protection and backup. But this has become a very serious issue, and we have to think of a very good processing model, and the vendors and the users and the developer will have to begin to think about this. Now, we have to think about the backyard security as well. In the past, we used to call it the bastion host. In other words, the system protection should be enhanced, and by doing so, you will be able to protect your backyard. But there are all sorts of web service applications, and the data handling have become too numerous, and the service virtualization has occurred. So in many ways, the backyard management itself is no longer enough. So in that sense, the backyard server will have to become even stronger. So a strong server implementation is required. It's not only the application, but the server that is behind it. In most of the cases, the application will be in the front and the server will be at the back. But how to make the server stronger, we have to address it very seriously. And it's not that you're creating them seriously, and I'm sure you're doing a proper job, but if you look around the world, there are backyard servers with a lot of data that had been stolen, so we have to be very careful. So the objective is not to create the system, but we have to protect the data. So we have to focus on protection of the data. So so system protection will be thought about. However, we have to also think seriously about the data protection. And that is something that is unique for Japan, is because of the very poor Personal Information Act. There are a lot of things that are being discussed, and we should neglect what some of the people are saying, and we should protect the data. And we want you to focus on that. And the other is the issue of HTTPS. The clear path data is good enough, which is provided by HTTPS, particularly in the case of authentication of the endpoint. HTTPS uses that. However, it can be used. However, there are many cases where it is not used, and the client may have problems. So when the problem occurs, so you don't know what has actually happened. You know the IP address, and you know the application that was used and port, but you don't know what is actually happening. This is happening quite often. So the account is usually taken away. So you cannot say that this was the account, but you need a powerful authentication. In addition to that, so in the endpoint authentication is not using the usable password, but with another reasonable method, you should be able to provide this endpoint authentication. So in that sense, there are ways of using it on the web or doing it on BP and so forth. There are many ways. However, the simple server-side HTTPS encryption is not enough. And in that sense, we should try hard to use the application, which is going to be needed now. And the third point, this has been mentioned from quite a long ago. Scalability is very important. And there are many components of the PC, be it tablet or smartphones or others. So if you simply think there are a lot of interactions. So this is taking this red course. In other words, if there are more things, then the computing cannot withstand that anymore. So we want to turn this to this blue line, which is very important, and we have to exert all of our efforts to be able to do that. So in that sense, how can we implement the scalability, which is the third category, which we need to do. So when we create the application, we're often very happy about the functionality that has been offered. And that's the frequent case. However, the problem after that is the scalability. 100 people playing the game, and it has increased to 5,000, 10,000, and so forth. Then we have to think about this. Web server is using by 1,000, but now it is being utilized by 100,000 and 200,000. So there are different technology will be required. So when it comes to scalability, this is a very difficult challenge that we have to address. And we would say very often that we have reached 1 million users, but actually it's very difficult to address. And the data center and web hosting people are involved, and when I ask them, then they talk about rare metal virtualization and so forth. But I'm using Facebook, but 800 million people is an extensive people, and Line, they have 300 million users. Amazing. So even if you reach the 100 million level, you have to be able to create a system that will operate. And I was talking with Miss-san of Data Hotel, and in Line, there are about 15 people. They created the application as a toy for 1,000 users, but then once it is released, it has increased the users very much. And they had to secure scalability, so they had to recode it, and it was hell for them. That is what I heard from that lecture. So everyone can create a function. However, when it comes to providing scalability, it's a matter of how to use your wisdom. So it's not making the web server in parallel or to make additional servers and so forth, but how can you find a bottleneck and how do you resolve that? So you need to know how to do this. So when it comes to resolving the bottleneck, this is actually very difficult. You can actually do research on this. So we have to really try hard here. So the challenge to scalability is such that it's going to be a big challenge for everyone. So we really have to work hard on this. So, but how? So how we can do this? Of course, everyone will have to try very hard to try to improve this on a qualitative way, but also on a quantitative way. So if you want to try to improve it in qualitatively, is very difficult. One thing that we know is that with a distributed management system, you would have a virtualization and clusterization, but not that if you can distribute it on a network, then the management of the data itself is going to be very difficult. But from functional standpoint, you can do a lot of things. So in the case of Tokyo, they would have a cluster and cluster in the US as well as in Osaka, and you would localize your users. So you're trying to achieve the scalability, which is often done. Now, from the standpoint of security, we have to do analysis at the same time observation. This is a PowerPoint that is used very frequently, but in the case of distributed system, you have to do all sorts of things. But recently, this analysis part, which is in the middle, people don't have the good one here. SOC service, security management service, and so forth. And there's 3 lower boxes are not separated clearly enough. In other words, all of the overhead costs will be accumulated here, and the security will have to be diversified. So the data intelligence, the business intelligence, and so forth will have to be thought about, and how we can recompose and so forth. And daily use analysis will have to be done and so forth. So if among you who are using web application, and when it comes to security management system is to be created, then to separate this and to create this is something that you have to really think hard about. How many more minutes do I have? 10 more minutes? So I've continued to talk, so I don't even have my watch here or a clock here. But what I wanted to say is actually quite simple. We want to have more data protection. People are just thinking about protecting the system, but we want to emphasize the importance of more data protection. That is what I would like to ask you. And the other thing is that in the case of data protection, it's not that something I'm involved, and everyone's talking about data protection. So be it encryption or anything else, there are many ways of addressing this. And more recently, we want to introduce a sophisticated method. And the evaluation would be we have to look at the data lifecycle. Are there any holes that we need to check and so forth? The other is including the security. The scalability is very important. So with respect to enhancing the scalability, it's a challenge, but you should be able to really address this. So in that sense, the web service has become quite enriched, but how can we create a data protection? We have to think very seriously in developing the systems. And at this OWASP meeting, various techniques and know-hows and technology will be introduced at the following sessions. So there's also a training day as well. So we have to think about what we can do. We want you to learn all of these things today. So that is what I would like to convey to you today. No, I have a request to the actual operators. I couldn't stop smiling. There is a password on a post-it. We don't want you to do this. So during the time I was giving this lecture, I really wanted people to do something about this post-it with a password. So I hope that you would implement the security well. Thank you very much for your attention. So what I talked about is quite simple, but with this I would like to close my remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
先生、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamaguchi.
We have enough time to take a few questions. Are there any questions? Those of you who have questions, please raise your hand. The pressure for you to ask questions is going to become stronger in the afternoon, so you should get your practice now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the valuable lecture. It wasn't valuable at all, but I found it insightful. HTTPS. Don't think about usage because there are many problems. But what's the reason why we shouldn't be using? What's the context? There are a few problems, but one is in the case of HTTPS, on the server side, cyber implementation will have to be dependent upon. So if the server is vulnerable, then you can't do anything about it. That's one problem. And then the other problem is on the client side, you really don't know who had been using it. That kind of information is not made available. And when it's cracked, your account is taken. So this account was used. So why? What's this all about? No information. But HTTPS itself is more capable. Client authentication, cyber combination, and server, it can be used. So all I'm saying is that I want to see such improvement. I don't want to sound so philosophical, but just because you're using it, you think you're safe. No, don't get rid of that belief, and especially the young developers. Many young developers are saying that it's not safe, and the elderlies are saying, no, it's still safe, so we can still use it. That kind of corporate management policy should be discarded. Even today, when you look at the service web ad, HTTPS is being used, so our security is very strong. Very strong. I find it so uncomfortable when I read that word on the ad. No problem whatsoever, says the ad. So way of use has to be maintained and improved. And I need the improvement. That's what I had tried to say. Thank you very much. One more question.
Should I stand up? Thank you very much. With respect to the analysis on SOC, the analysis is not being separated, which is an issue you said. Can you elaborate further and tell us about it, please? When it comes to the analysis, the biggest issue here is that you don't know normally. So unless you have to use an expert service, you won't know. The analysis itself is going to be time-consuming at the time. The technique will have to be used, and you have to use encryption, decryption, and so forth. So in the SOC operation, you want to do it and you want to analyze it very well. Now, when it comes to SOC service or security service management, there are unknowns, and you just leave it as unknown in many cases. But this would become a different category of service, or this will be outsourced to the third party and so forth. So if you're using SOC service, the good thing is that you don't have to do it on your own, but the disadvantage is that you're doing all sorts of things that are not necessary. So some of the necessary thing may be missed. You would say that because you don't know, you don't have to do it. The time is more important for you now, for example, and you should be able to separate it clearly. Now, when it comes to SOC service, it's good that if it becomes an intelligent service. However, currently it is a labor-intensive service, and you're thinking about how to save your labor costs. Then you don't end up with a good one. In the case of security, you have to have the smartness as well as wisdom and so forth. So rather than doing it on your own, you should spend a lot of money and hire the good expert. But the reverse is taking place in Japan. SOC service can manage security cheaply. And unless you break out of this, the issue would arrive. So you have to be careful about this. Yes, thank you.
There was one more hand. Thank you very much for the lecture. Backyard security sheet was shown. Powerful enough, PKI was the phrase you used. Was it this page? Yes. PKI in itself does have strength or power in terms of theory, but are you saying that you shouldn't depend solely on this, or what's the message? The PKI standard itself is capable, but the way of use is very simple, and it's not being used in a so sophisticated manner. And especially in the case of PKI, there are a few issues. There are a few versions. It's not 0.1, trust level 2. And it's not just one certification. You can use more than one certificate. And my certificate kind of fraud has become prevalent. So is PKI being used powerful enough? Not really in terms of use. If you're going to use PKI, use it well. And I personally had been using PKI. My doctoral thesis, dissertation was on PKI. That was a long time ago, but there are other ways of use, not just a simple way of use as people are relying on. And how do you use the certificate of profile and using more than one certificate? HTTPS server certificate included, that's enough. People think so. So use needs to be more powerful. That's the message. HTTPS, PKI, so powerful enough, many people say, but that may not be the case. That's the message.
最初のキーノート、ものすごい
We had a very hot keynote address. We have received a lot of encouragement to the OWASP community. Thank you very much for your presentation.